But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tom and Max to talk about Pangram.
Thank you,
Thank
Bert.
you, Bert. So, yeah, since I started writing about AI writing, I had a few interesting responses from people. A couple that stand out recently were one from a senior newspaper editor who was telling me how her newsroom has just been flooded with freelance work that is AI generated or AI assisted. And part of the problem is that nobody really knows what the rules are anymore. Another person contacted me, an author. He just published his first book, and he's working on his second book right now. And he said to me in this note that he's feeling plagued by many sleepless nights recently, wondering what's the point. So I think that what feels like is happening right now is that there's kind of an ambient dread that maybe we're in the process of losing something that is really valuable to people. And Pangram obviously presents itself as a way that we can perhaps cling on to that. One of the things I really want to dig into today is how this works, whether it actually works. But maybe we can start the conversation, Max, by going back to when you founded this company back in 2023, at a time when ChatGPT had been out for approximately, I think, a year at that time, roughly.
Mhm.
And you're a bright Stanford grad doing a startup. A lot of people would have been taking a different tack when it came to AI. Why did you care about something like authenticity at that time?
Um, I mean, I've always liked to read. I'm an avid science fiction reader, and so I think maybe that's part of it. But a lot of what we were thinking about is really just like what are the second order effects of this technology on society? I think like basically when I was starting this company, I kind of felt like I had seen GPT-4 come out. I realized like this is really powerful technology. I'm really thinking, do I join OpenAI and try to help build this technology? Uh, is this going to be good for the world, bad for the world? If it's bad for the world, what are ways we could help mitigate these harms? And that's where we sort of landed on, oh, it would actually be really bad for the world if there was no way to detect whether something was AI generated. And that was kind of like the the early start of this idea. Obviously, there were other AI detectors out there at the time. We were nowhere near the first, but everything else out there seemed like it was really bad. So I thought we could do a lot better.
So that's now 1,000 years ago, or 3 years in AI world. So what exactly has evolved in your thinking about this since then? Because at that time you were looking at it as a hypothetical. I mean, obviously there was the whole issue of deepfakes was already very alive back then. But in terms of really competent, effective writing that could generate so much and replicate human beings in a way that most people could not easily detect, things must have changed in your thinking. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it really went from like a hypothetical problem to suddenly it felt like late last year into this year. Now everybody has this problem. I think for a while, people were even like early on, I was talking to some like review platforms, for example, they're seeing like 3%, 5%, 7% of their reviews are AI generated. And they're still kind of in this like wait and see phase of like, is this just going to be the norm? Is this just people like using ChatGPT to help them? Or is this actually like review fraud? And so I think like a lot of industries kind of felt the same way of like, they're not sure if this is going to be a major issue. And now, 2026, I think a lot of people are pretty confident that, like, yes, this is an issue. Yes, we need to take a stance. We can't just pretend that AI doesn't exist or that it, doesn't have the effects that it has.
What has this felt like for you on the inside? Because I mean, it's really been, I think, about less than a year that it feels like Pangram has really kind of taken off and is setting off, causing scandals with detection. What does that felt like from your perspective?
I mean, I think it's been very promising in terms of, I think like Pangram blowing up is sort of just like emblematic of a lot of people taking this problem seriously themselves. But this is also kind of like the payoff of the years of hard work and research that we've done. Like we've published 3 research papers. We've worked really hard with the academic and scientific communities to build benchmarks and help show that this is accurate and we can be useful.
Yeah. So let's turn a little bit to that research. And I'm mindful that we have an audience that includes some technologists, and also journalists, and so we'll have a range of technical expertise here. So one of the key things that always comes up with AI writing detectors is whether these things actually work and what they might get wrong. So I wonder if we can really go through this in a fairly accessible technical way that gets to the bottom of how effective they are and where the mistakes might be. So first of all, maybe we can start off with this question. How do you actually measure the reliability of an AI detection tool? What are you looking at to judge whether it's working or not?
Yeah, so there's sort of two metrics that we look at. So one is false positive rate, and this is how if we look at like how many human texts do we need to look at before Pangram incorrectly flags one as AI? So Pangram's false positive rate is about 1 in 10,000, which means for every 10,000 pieces of human text, Pangram will get it wrong once on average. The other metric we look at is called false negative rate, and this is how many AI texts do we have to look at before Pangram misses one, and says that it's human. And so for us, we believe that false positive rate is the much bigger, is like the really important thing to keep down. And then so we kind of try to hold our false positive rate at 1 in 10,000 and then do the best we can on false negative rate, which tends to hover around like 1 in or like 99% or 1 in 100.
Okay, so I think that the significance here and the thing that people are really worried about is false positives, right? Because
Mhm.
in effect, a false positive is a false accusation of somebody. It's saying that that this person legitimately wrote is actually flagged as being AI. So in other words, you have to the degree that you can skew one way or another, your application is skewing towards minimizing the false positives. In other words, minimizing the false accusations of people, or at least keeping them to 1 in 10,000, and then trying to reduce the false positives. That is to say, in other words, like making it an accurate, good detector of AI stuff at the same time. Is that how it's working?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's get into part of why there's a lot of doubt about whether these things can work at all. Part of it is that it's all incredibly new and it's quite unsettling, all this stuff. Another part of it is that I think many people who are writing, they have a legitimate terror of like what would happen if I was accused, and that would completely destroy my career. Or they're thinking about students, let's say, and it would, get them expelled, or a public figure. Like there are really legitimate reasons to be worried about this, particularly because the early detection apps didn't quite work. Can you tell me why they didn't work? What were they doing, and what were they doing differently than what you're doing?
Yeah, so a lot of these early AI detection apps, they used a metric called perplexity, which essentially means how confusing is this piece of text to a language model. So an example of this is the boy ate a bowl of soup is a low perplexity sentence. Every word kind of like makes sense there. Whereas the boy ate a bowl of spiders would be a high perplexity sentence because spiders is unexpected. And so what a lot of these early AI detectors did, which was in line with the research at the time, like this was considered the most effective way to do AI detection, was you measure the perplexity of the document and you just set some threshold. You say AI text on average is low perplexity and human text on average is high perplexity. So this can get you like a 95% accuracy model. The problem is the like 5% error rate. So any documents that the model has memorized, like the Declaration of Independence, would be flagged as AI. Non-native English speakers who speak in or write in very simple English would also get flagged as AI. And so I think there were a lot of issues with this approach, but this is what most of the early ones did because this is what people believed would work at the time. And so we took kind of a different approach. We took a much more uh, computationally heavy approach. Uh, what we did is we trained our own classification model on hundreds of thousands of examples of human text. And then we did something called synthetic mirroring, which means we take a human text, for example, like a 500-word essay on Moby Dick, and then we ask ChatGPT, write a 500-word essay on Moby Dick in the style of this ninth grader, something like that. So now we have two documents. One is written by a human, one's written by an AI, and then our model learns what are the different choices that the AI model made and makes consistently in a way that humans don't always make. And so by doing this statistical analysis over hundreds of thousands and millions of documents, we're able to eventually get something that works much better than Perplexity.
Yeah, if I understand correctly as well, one of the interesting features of the way that you do this is that you train the model, and then, which is, by the way, it's an open weight model, right? You use that's your base model. You use an open weight model you're building off, so it already has
Mhm.
some understanding of the world. It is basically a
Sure.
functioning LLM of some sort, and then you run that training, but there's still going to be some mistakes, and so you do the mirroring on those mistakes on the edge cases, and then you kind of go back, you add that to the training set, and you retrain it like from scratch, right? So you kind of keep going with this loop, algorithmic loop, that is like finding the bits where it's weak, and then it's producing generated replicas, and so on and so on and so on until you reach a certain optimal point. Is that how it's going?
Exactly. Yeah. I think one of the advantages of Pangram being a trained model rather than a metric is that we can put it in this self-improving loop and basically keep searching for more difficult examples that Pangram gets wrong and then uh, learn why it got it wrong and improve and get better.
There's something that really I find fascinating in your application is that once it flags something, you can go back and you can look to see the things that are AI-ish in the text. But you've also explained to me before when we spoke that it's not actually going to those things and making its original judgment from that. That's more a hindsight evaluation of the text and saying like this is the kind of thing that could be AI-ish. So do we really know, or do you really know what it's detecting in there? Or is it, I mean, how is it that working? Is it a bit of a black box in that way?
Um, it is a bit of a black box. I think if you look at the like actually what's affecting the model, it's no single thing of like, oh, it said like it's not just X, it's Y. Like that's a AIism. That's what people do. That's like what my intuition does is I pattern match to patterns and cliches that I see in AI text, and that's what makes me think it's AI. But I think what Pangram does is it's picking up on a much higher number of much more subtle signals. So it's like no single word or phrase is going to be the smoking gun, but rather it's looking like, okay, this could have been phrased in two ways, but it chose the way that AI consistently chooses. And then later on, this wording and phrasing is also um, was created in the way that like AI tends to prefer. And so like each one of these is like, yeah, it's not a huge deal. People write like this all the time. But if you accumulate and aggregate these stylistic choices over the course of the full document, that's when we can actually build up great confidence that something's AI.
Okay. So I was talking to a friend the other day, and they showed me a document of theirs, and I dropped it into Pangram, and it was AI generated. And I went back to my friend. I said, beware, you can get this can be identified. So you probably want to write this thing if you mind about it being identified as such. And her question to me was, well, how can I hide that, or like how can I do something to it? Like, in other words, how can I humanize this? There are existing humanizer apps out there as well. So why isn't that just going to be the next step? If people are willing or incentivized to produce really amazing text that they couldn't easily or quickly produce on their own, then why can't they go back to a generated text, like drop it into Pangram and then kind of fix it? Is there a way to catch that or identify that?
Mm, I think like we see this sometimes with user behavior of see some like if you try to track it in embedding space, something's very AI, and then slowly like a user scans will like drag it to the human side, and then they'll get it to like just barely human with low confidence, and then they'll submit the assignment or whatever. That's like not really our intended use case, and I don't And I think that's just like more effort than like doing something yourself. I think even I think oftentimes people who use AI for writing are coming from a place of insecurity and they believe that, oh, AI could do this better than me. So, like, why would I ever do it myself? And then they kind of like put themselves into a position where they're not learning and they're not getting better. And instead, they're like offloading their cognition onto AI. And so that's something that I think like Pangram is not really going to solve, except by creating norms that, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be like offloading all your thinking to AI.
Yeah. So I suppose that touches on another question that comes up a lot, which is uh, what is wrong with AI writing? I mean, there are clearly cases of great utility for it, explaining things to you and so forth. Why, in your mind, is it actually bad? You mentioned cognitive offloading. Is that the totality of the problem? That
Um,
humanity, or human being, is just going to lose their ability to think or have that particular writing skill?
I think for me, like the greater issue is just the intellectual dishonesty of people who use AI to wholesale fully create text or document and then they pass it off as their own. I think we see this oftentimes with like publications and freelancers or like somebody trying to shirk their job or there's like a bunch of get rich quick courses on the internet on how you can publish an AI generated book in 7 days on Amazon and then start making $1,000 a month. I think it's all kind of like course grifters who are trying to sell a promise that people won't actually be able to attain. But yeah, I think overall the issue is just like it's so easy to pollute the information ecosystem with AI generated text. And it feels good. Like people like using AI to produce things. But I think from the like reading and consumption side, I think there's a lot of people who really prefer to be reading something that was written by a human and reading real opinions from a real person.
Have you given, and we have obviously a lot of journalists in the audience, have you given any thought to the way that this could affect the information space generally if you have lots of AI generated material out there?
Oh yeah, I mean we're already seeing this. So like um the like early Trump like or the like Russian troll disinformation campaigns where they had like Russians going and like commenting pro-Trump or like divisive things all across the internet. That's all kind of just been replaced with AI and LLMs. So what we've seen now is like there are full websites that look like American local news sites, but are actually fully AI generated. They have tens of thousands of articles that are all generated by AI, and they're all like many of them are normal, and then some of them are like subtly pushing the like pro-Russia propaganda. And so I think these are the sorts of things that are really dangerous. And if there's no way to kind of detect this at scale, then people are going to fall down these rabbit holes and get tricked by what's essentially like it's a mirage. It's not real.
So there are powerful forces who would like to use this and maybe are using AI generated material already, as well as individuals who would have a great incentive to benefit from it. What reason is there to think that an application like yours is going to last, is going to survive, presumably a kind of arms race between your technology and the writing technology, even if you're just looking at standard models that they want to improve their writing quality and so forth, and perhaps indirectly that humanizes it in some ways. So, how do you are you looking at an arms race? And if so, do you lose that? What happens next?
I mean, I think we're definitely looking at some arms race. I think we can win though. I think we are focused so strongly on the detectability question. And I think the major model providers are realizing that there's actually a trade-off between undetectability and capabilities. So today's frontier models are highly capable, but these capabilities are instilled into them through a process called post-training, which adds a lot of preferences. For example, like this is how you code well, this is how you write well, this is how like the goal of these AI companies is to make their models superhuman, but by doing so, they add preferences, and then these preferences are what Pangram is able to detect. So I think with that said, these models are getting better and they're able to use their context more efficiently. And so this is making the task of detecting AI harder. Not impossible, but I think we're stepping up our game. We're training bigger models. We're collecting more data. I think it's always going to be a back and forth, but I think that's part of what makes this a valuable problem to solve.
There's something that I think you mentioned before that really stuck in my head and I thought was pretty fascinating from a technical perspective, which is you said that as the major models got better and better, then the writing, AI writing actually got easier to detect, which is sort of paradoxical. You would imagine that they get better, they're more human and so forth. But however, you were saying that this connects to the post training, right? That
Mhm.
the preferences are more clearly delineated. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually think the most difficult AI model to detect was GPT-2 because it had no um, post-training, no preferences. What it was really trained to do was mimic its training set, which is like it, its goal is to do next token prediction and guess the next word from its corpus of internet data. And so that is like actually a near impossible task to predict. But I think we're not doing that anymore. Really, yeah, so the models, I think they're getting easier to catch because their preferences are stronger, but they're also getting harder to catch because they're getting better at using their context and they're able to like the way people use AI these days is not just like in ChatGPT, write me a blog post on this topic. It's like they're in Codex, they're like do a bunch of research on like the current state of Iran and then write me um, gather a bunch of information and then consolidate that into a Substack post or something. And so it's using a lot more information than it used to. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have to deal with.
And how do you handle the question of AI assisted rather than generated text? Because if I think a lot of people are using it is they write, they get the machine to edit it, they accept a certain paragraph here and there. So how exactly do you can is that something you cannot identify?
I think we see the future going in a direction where many more people are using AI in an assistive way, and we want to be able to differentiate between that and something that's truly fully AI generated. So Pangram has a few classes. Pangram has says something is human, it's lightly AI assisted, moderately AI assisted, or AI generated. And depending on the degree of AI assistance, we'll say one thing or another. Um, what I've found is if you ask AI to fix your spelling or grammar, it's usually going to just come back as human still. Whereas if you ask AI to like completely rewrite your text in a way that like makes more sense or reformats it or something, or not reformat, but um like reorganizes it, I think that's where things are more likely to just come back as fully AI instead of AI assisted.
We're
So
going to
but
turn
I think we're like really working on having better uh, giving a better higher granularity view into this spectrum of AI use.
We're going to turn over to questions in a moment. I just want to finish with one last, to audience questions, but I want to I want to finish up with one last question, which connects to journalism here, which is publishers, journalists, editors, all that. You must be talking to them or aware of what they're doing or not doing, or at the very
Mhm.
least, I imagine monitoring how this is being used. What are your thoughts there from your perspective as the developer of this technology? What is your sense about how widespread its use is, about whether it's being used appropriately, or whether you're getting interesting feedback from the news industry generally?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a really wide range of AI use. It seems like norms really haven't settled here. Some people who are like, now I can use AI to pump out 7 articles a day, and some people who are like, at most, I'm going to use AI kind of like a Google search on steroids, um, or some people who don't use AI at all. But I think like we're seeing a lot of different uses, and part of how we work with different publications and media companies is mostly just helping them understand like how people are using AI, and essentially like enforce their policies. So I think we've seen a couple like newspapers say like, we want our staff writers to use AI to make them more productive, but like for freelance writers, we want something that's fully human written. And I think partly this is just because of like the ecosystem effects of they're just getting like in a less trusted environment, the AI use is more likely to be a signal of like misconduct or like low effort.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. You could see a greater vulnerability perhaps to AI generated material from inside, but also those relationships are built on existing trust and knowledge that that person is, well, what sort of a journalist that person is in the first place. Do you find that particular parts of the industry are adopting this more than others? I think you mentioned that publishing in sense of book publishing is maybe a bit behind. Is that true for journalism as well?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I hadn't seen anyone really adopting tools like this before 2026. And might be kind of just my perspective as Pangram. So I don't have a better sense, but like a lot of the publishers I'm talking to, they don't have a tool they're already using. They're like, we have nothing right now, and we want to get the most accurate thing just to get some visibility into what's going on.
Thank you, Max. Bert, I'll hand it over to you. I think you're overseeing the audience questions.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Max and Tom. Actually, Barbara Weidman has a question. Do you want to go ahead and unmute and just ask it out loud?
Yes, thank you. I try my best. Aren't journalists particularly at risk of their articles being identified as false positives? After all, our articles often display characteristics that are also found in AI outputs, as clear structure,
Mhm.
few discretions, a factual tone, minimal repetition, and a high degree of linguistic fluency.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And so, like to answer your question, basically, uh, we evaluate our Pangram model. We look at a bunch of articles from journalists and newspapers, and we use that in our evaluations and make sure we don't have an elevated false positive rate here. What I've actually found is that like AI is definitely not as good as a, a real journalist at producing an article. I think it tends to still um, use fewer like concrete facts and named entities and quotes and things like that. And it will prefer to be a little bit more vague and general in its writing. And so I think that's one way, at least like intuitively, that I am able to distinguish between AI and non-AI writing here.
Thank you. That's reassuring.
Mhm.
Ryan, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask? You had a couple of questions.
Yeah, hey everybody, it's Ryan from CNN. Thank you so much, Max, for doing this. This is really, really interesting and very cool. I think just like the couple of things, like from a reporting standpoint, from a news perspective, obviously, like if you're going to say something is AI generated, you really have to feel like very, very confident that that is the case. If you're going to kind of like make that accusation of a piece of
Mhm.
writing. So I'm just kind of interested how you guys go about your evaluation process and how you kind of landed on that 1 in 10,000 false positive rate.
Yeah, for sure. So what we do is we look at a few million documents over the course of a bunch of different domains. So the domains include like academic writing, scientific writing, like biology journals, newspapers, Wikipedia, poetry, recipes. Like basically, we try to cover the whole spectrum of things and have at least a few 100,000 examples of each. And then what we do is we run Pangram uh, on all of these examples. And these are all typically like examples from 2010 to 2022 before ChatGPT, so we know that they're confirmed to be written by a human. And we report our accuracy on these on these data sets from this time period. So I think something that we're looking at now, which you may be curious about, is how do you know that Pangram is still accurate on 2026 data, right? I think a lot has changed. Language is malleable and it changes. So also what we are in the process of doing, and I'm hopefully going to have better numbers to share soon, is we're just collecting additional data and really making sure that it's clean. And I think that's like something that's very difficult um, to do. If you look at just any like large scale data set, there's some amount of people that are using AI for something, whether it's like on Reddit or like anywhere on the internet. Um, I don't know. We have some ideas here.
That's really helpful. Can I ask one more question about the how you calculate the false negative rate and how
Sure.
you test that?
Yeah. For that, I think this is so we have a couple things. I think the one that's most representative of the real world is there's a data set called Wild Chat. And what it is, it's a bunch of AI assistant chats collected from the wild. So they have the like user queries and then the assistant responses. And then so we go and we collect all of these queries and we filter this down to only the generative queries, only the ones that say like write me a draft or a blog or something. So we're not looking for the question of like when was George Washington born? That's like out of scope. So it's only the generative queries. And then we run these through all of the modern frontier models. And then we see how many of them we get correct and how many we miss. And so for wild chat, we have about a 1.5% false negative rate. So we get 98.5%.
Awesome. Very helpful. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Ava, yeah, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's a good fit because actually you started talking about that. How do you know how human written text looks in 2026? Because there's already research out there that shows that our language is changing with, of course, as well with AI, so that people start to use those AI typical words more often in their writing and probably also speaking. And I really like fantasy, how you can find out the true false positive rate in 2026 because there's no way to get a training data of human written text from 2026 because you never know which text is really human written, right? So how do you do that? I think that really
Mm-hmm.
would be important for us to know.
So I have kind of two ideas here. One, and I think neither of these I have numbers on that we could share now, but this is more like speaking in hypotheticals of like first off, looking at trusted writers. So like people who are journalists or novelists who have written work before the advent of ChatGPT, so that we can kind of track like have they been, yeah, how is their language changing? I think especially when they're professionals, I think we can have more confidence that they like to write and are willing to write themselves and not use AI. And then on the other side, I think something that we're also concerned about is like students, like children who have kind of grown up with ChatGPT, like is their language different? And so for that, one of my ideas, which yeah, we haven't done yet, but I would like to, is actually just like have either like a scholarship contest or like literally like pay students to come in and like handwrite some essays and then we can like scan them and like basically
Can you
we
get
need a
enough
way
of
to like
that?
confirm that it's not AI generated.
That was the only idea I had, actually, observing people while they are writing, but they are not allowed to write on the computer, right? Because
Yeah.
then you never know. And I mean, is this possible? How much do you have to pay, and how much? We all know how many training data you need for modern AI models. So
This
I
wouldn't
was
be
really
something
wondering
that
if
we
this
would
is
train
possible.
on. This would be something that we would use to evaluate our model.
To see if the false positive rate still is the
Yeah,
same compared to pre-ChatGPT.
exactly. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Mhm.
Jeremy, yeah, you had a question, and I think it also relates to Mike's question that he posted in the chat, kind of asking more from an educator angle.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. One, I put in the chat, which is, as an educator, is there a way to use the tool where you put the assignment prompt, as a suggested prompt, and it might factor that in seeing, what it might generate. And then my second question is, I notice a lot of these tools now allow you to edit the default system prompt. You can go into the settings, and because the default has a very distinct tone, which is
Mhm.
very sycophant and it uses a very particular voice. But if you go into the settings, you can kind of tweak it a little bit. And I'm wondering if that could alter the results in any way.
Yeah, so I'll answer the system prompt question first. Basically, part of our training process is we train on a bunch of AI text like generated by a bunch of different system prompts or different ways, basically different custom instructions to ensure that we're robust to changes here. So even if you say write like a human, don't use M dashes, don't use not just X but Y. Like I think that's not really enough to fool Pangram. The
Thanks.
other question is, can Pangram use the assignment to be more accurate, essentially? I think today, no, but I think something that I do see educators use effectively is just like have ChatGPT and Claude just feed it the assignment and then get something out of it, and then like use that uh, as comparison, essentially. Like, oh, if the student's essay looks exactly like this ChatGPT essay, that's another data point to use. But no, Pangram does not use that currently.
Yeah, because that's exactly, I think a lot of people ad hoc do that, just on their own. And that's why I was curious. Thanks.
Yeah.
Just to build on that, so Mike, who also teaches journalism, was asking about this. That he has used some of your competitors, GPT-0, copy leaks. He's wondering why Pangram is different and more accurate potentially. He says the others are also just as good. I know GPT-0 just got acquired by another company, but yeah, curious what you would say in your.
Yeah. Um, Look, they're not that bad. Like they're not awful. I'm like I really don't want to like badmouth competitors. Typically on the evaluations, GPT-0 and copy leaks have around a 1% false positive rate, which is 1 in 100. So it's fine. It means like you're usually gonna get correct um, answers. And I think it's hard to like qualitatively understand the difference between a 1 in 100 false positive rate and a 1 in 10,000 unless you're like running really large scale data sets. With that said, yeah, GPT-0 did get acquired by um, Superhuman, who also puts out AI humanizer tools, and I'm not really like a fan of that. I think I think they're trying too hard to play both sides, and copy leaks. I haven't used them too much, so I can't really comment there. But yeah, I think like they all kind of started with this perplexity idea, and over time, my guess is that they're using more of a deep learning approach now, but none of them publish research on it, so we don't really know.
Kate, did you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Sure. So I'm trying to envision using a tool like this, like as a journalist who is trying to gather information. Obviously, there's a lot out there, and a lot of slop out there. So, how would you envision using Pangram in the reporting and kind of vetting of internet sources process? Like, should it become standard for journalists to start like basically running like a source that they find on the internet through this tool, find out if it's AI generated or not, and then like your thoughts on what we should do with that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should definitely be suspicious if like a source is trying to leak you a document and then it turns out to be AI generated. There was one that really came up. It was, I think it was like one of the hard fork guys was looking into this Reddit post by a supposed whistleblower who claimed to be a software engineer at Uber Eats. Um, then like sent him a design doc, but it ended up to be, but that was AI generated, but he didn't realize it. He also sent like a badge of his like, Uber Eats company badge, but that was generated by Gemini, like image generation. And so I think like it took him a while of like getting really deep into the story before realizing like this whistleblower had actually just been lying to him the whole time. and like none of the like everything he had sent was AI generated, and none of it was true. So I think, yeah, I think there's like definite use here. Obviously, like just because something is human written doesn't mean it's um, real, and just because it's AI generated doesn't mean like it doesn't exist elsewhere. But I think it's a useful signal to use.
Thanks. Paul, you want to go ahead and ask about visuals?
Yeah. So to me, I think AI generated text isn't nearly as concerning, right? Because I just think, for someone whose English is not that great, I think AI is great. It basically equalize, right?
Mhm.
It value their thoughts rather than their ability to write. But more
Mhm.
concerning, I feel like for the sector in journalism is AI generated photos and videos, because that actually lead to greater
Jose.
misinformation. Do you have any plans to expand PamGrant into AI detection for image and video as well?
Um, I can't comment at this time.
So it's not a no, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, we'll see. I think this is a really important space, and I think um, where yeah, we've done a bunch of benchmarking in terms of who's the best out there and what are the gaps in the market. And but with any like machine learning product, I think progress is not always linear. So we'll see when and if this happens, and if so, I think it's going to be very exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, any other questions, please feel free to post in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what Paul's getting at. And I think a couple of people are asking, earlier too, like what, is all slop a bad thing? I mean, when it's actually not necessarily a bad thing, if there are cases where it's fine. Like you said, not all AI generated text is not real necessarily.
Yeah, and we try not to apply a moral judgment like, hey, like because this is AI generated or AI assisted, like, your text is worthless. That's not really the point. But I think the point is to empower people to know when something is AI generated.
I mean, and some, I mean, news organizations, like namely, I guess the New York Times, they've said that they would never let AI generated text replace what people write. I mean, that they would,
Yeah, I think that's valuable. That's true. Like there's so many people reading it. They should, put a lot of care into producing it.
but I guess I do wonder at some scale, like, is that preventing, new potential journalism products that might actually be useful for audiences? Like, if you could truly give people personalized information about, their neighborhood, where they live, that only one person might care about by, doing interesting things with public data, or if somebody,
Maybe.
wants,
We've seen some uses of AI that seem to crop up right now are using AI to summarize sports and do a little like sports journalism, or using AI to just like elaborate on a weather report essentially. So rather than just say like 79 degrees and then 80 degrees, it says like it'll just put it into natural language. And I think that's like a totally fine and like respectable use of AI.
yeah, no, the AP like started doing that with sports and like earnings reports from companies. I mean, it's kind of very boilerplate, basic
Mhm.
journalistic work that I guess people would say, it would be better to spend time doing more high impact investigative work, getting sources to reveal new information, not just rehashing press releases, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Diane, you have a question if you want to unmute, or I can ask it for you.
Hi,
Hey.
I just wanted to know if there were exercises that journalism educators could use for their students in their classes to prepare them.
Um, I don't think anything like really comes like I can't. Well, I can tell you some of the exercises that we do, and then it may or may not be useful for journalism students. But We like to do something called a human baseline, where one person has a set of human texts, say it's like a bunch of news articles, and then they ask AI to generate a bunch of news articles as well, and then they shuffle them up, and then they present them to someone else, and then so, new person, it's their job to look at 10 news articles and figure out which ones are AI and which ones are human. And so I think it's a really fun task that can build intuition around AI text because oftentimes it's like not really that intuitive, but after you get a few reps, you start to like recognize the patterns.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Ryan, you have a question again?
Can I ask one more? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Cool. Hey, so I just want to kind of like I want to kind of reiterate what Bert was just saying a minute ago about just kind of like I know that you said you don't make kind of moral judgments on whether or not to trust or use AI generated text and just kind of report it.
Mhm.
But I'm just curious because obviously you spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like when for those of us who are trying to write policies and make standards judgments about like that are going to live the test of time and still be relevant in 3 to 5 years
Mhm.
like and are thinking about how to accept different degrees of AI influence on text and also reporting quotes that we believe to be AI generated and things like that. Just how do you think about where we as like society are going to be in 3 to 5 years on that question, and what kind of like advice you might have for folks who are trying to kind of make come up with principles that guide our policies moving forward?
Uh, Maybe it's crazy for me to think that like 3 to 5 years is like an impossibly long timeline, and it's hard to like. It's going to be really difficult to totally future-proof something. So I'd actually think more about just like how can we be flexible about this and really keep an eye on things and not have a long process if we want to change our policies. Um, but the main guiding principles that I'm thinking about is mostly around like if we use AI to save time here, who benefits and who suffers? And is that a trade-off that we are happy to make? So if there's a case where, like, for example, we're switching to writing our weather reporting with AI, like some people benefit because they no longer have to do that job. Maybe some people suffer because they lose their job, which was writing about the weather. But I think like on average, the audience doesn't really care. Whereas I think if we are looking, one of the places I look is like peer review. I think this is a really important one where it is easier to write papers with AI. I saw there's a recent computer science conference which had one author who had submitted 65 papers in within one cycle, and about 30 of them got accepted. And so obviously the people who benefit in this case are the people who are using AI to put out more papers. But I think the people who suffer are the peer reviewers who have to review much, much more research. And so I think there the trade-off is a lot less clear of like why is it good for one person to be able to submit 65 papers and have a like 50% acceptance rate?
Thanks.
That does kind of remind me of like the issues with open source code too, that people now are using AI assisted, coding tools to generate so much code for open source projects, and the time to review them is the bottleneck, and people are shutting off, repos and refusing to accept AI generated code.
Yeah, it's like why would you accept somebody else's massive AI generated change request if you could just ask your AI to make the same change and like have a little bit more trust over the actual code.
Right.
I don't know. It's a really weird time for software engineering in general. I
Paul,
see Paul had a question. Oh, you're muted.
So it's tangent to sort of Ryan and some of the. I feel like right now we have a tendency to equate AI generated text equal low quality. And when in fact, the more important differentiator is whether something is true or not true. At what point do you think, whether it's Pangram or Pangram with other tools, could actually differentiate, yes, this is AI generated, but it's also 100% true?
Yeah, I
Or like
mean,
the truthiness is much higher, right? Because I do think in our mind, we think just because AI wrote it, somehow is false when in fact it's not.
if I could build a truth oracle, I think I would be a much, much richer person. Um, but realistically, I think there's a reason that people have this association. I think in the past, you could look at a piece of text, and if it is riddled with grammar mistakes, you will consider, or it's really short, then you consider maybe this was low effort. This person didn't put that much time into writing it. Whereas if a blog post or article is well written, it's like all the like spelling and grammar is right, and it seems like fluent and eloquent. It's obviously edited. Then it seems like somebody put a lot of effort in this, so it's probably worth reading. And so I think AI has kind of like flipped that on its head in a way where the majority of AI text that people encounter is low effort. So even if there are gems of AI generated text, people already have this association of this style is low effort and low quality because they see so much of this low quality text all like everywhere they look. There's Substacks that are fully AI generated. There's yeah, like LinkedIn posts. Just we put out something this morning that 40% of long form LinkedIn posts are AI generated. And it's just like maybe some of them are good, but I think most of them are low quality.
So let's follow up. At what point do we need to actually evaluate the quality AI generated content versus the low quality AI generated content?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think there's maybe a way of doing this where we can um, try to infer like how much context and how much of a prompt did this like AI generated content have? Like, is it something that was a low effort prompt or does it have a ton of context? I think this is maybe a tractable problem, something that we are interested in solving.
Thank you.
Sonia, you want to go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I wanted to know there is this whole discourse around content provenance. So, for instance, Google has launched its Synth ID. There is
Mhm.
a C2PA protocol that is also in the works. I'm not sure where we are with it, but it's an coalition of big tech from Meta, Amazon, everyone are part of it, including hardware companies, mobile companies. So, when if this content provenance in some way takes off, where do you see tools like Pangram come into effect, and where is the value addition going to happen? Because if we will already have a watermark labeling happening that this is AI generated, then where does tools like yours distinguish itself?
That's a great question. I think these content provenance tools are a really important part of the ecosystem, and I think Pangram and C2PA are very complementary. Uh, Part of the problem is there's a lot of these open source models that are not watermarked and don't have any sort of content provenance. And I think this is, for example, like if I generate an image with Google, then I could use Synth ID, which is Google's tool to basically say, yes, this was generated by Gemini AI. However, if I use an open source model like Stable Diffusion, then there is no watermarking on it, and there's no way to really tell except if we're using a tool like Pangram, which is a post hoc detection tool. So I would like to see more watermarking and more content provenance tools. I think they just haven't really been super widely adopted today.
Thanks for your
Sorry,
question.
can I ask a follow-up? Sorry, can I ask a follow-up?
Oh, okay, but we're running low on time, so very quickly. Yeah, go ahead.
So if the content provenance tools sort of take off, how would Pangram sync up with those? Like, is there any sync up between SynthID and Pangram at this point?
I think the best thing to do would be like, yeah, you can use them as sort of like a Venn diagram. So yeah, if SynthID says says something is AI, then we know for sure it's AI. If something says, if SynthID doesn't say something's AI, that just means it wasn't generated by Google, but it might be generated by any of the open source models, like open source text models. So I think Pangram is still useful there. And there's a lot of reasons why people are going to try to evade AI detectors, and they're also going to try to evade watermarks. And I think it watermarks can be removed, and so this is just an additional layer of protection.
Thanks. Well, thank you both. Any final wrap up? I guess, Tom, did you want to ask anything or any final thoughts?
Um, I'm good. I see Tom is muted. I don't know if
Sorry.
anything's. Oh, he's still muted. Well, I mean, thanks so much for having me. It was really fun talking about this.
Yeah, thank you so
And
much.
and thank you, Tom, for the really great questions.
Yeah, no, and I definitely will go ahead and send the recording out to people. I will encourage you to also read Tom's link, which I'll share again about, the 5 rules of AI assisted writing and kind of talking about the value of human writing and in a world where so much is assisted by AI. Again, I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank the MacArthur Foundation as well that supports Hacks Hackers. Please follow our updates from our website and look forward to seeing you all in a future event. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.